I'm DaShaun. I'm a Spring Developer Advocate. I don't know how many days. It's been a few days, like 611 or 612, and I love my job. Kubernetes is a thing. We've heard about Kubernetes. I think it's got legs, it's doing stuff. And yeah, it's just, Kubernetes is an open source system for automating deployment and scaling the management of containerized applications. Do we need to review containers for anybody? No? Fantastic. Everybody's comfortable with Kubernetes, at least know how to spell it? Yes? Perfect. So this topic is really, I'm kind of trying to bring forward some of the things that I had in my career. I was a developer for a long time, and yeah, I've learned some things. And I'm a big fan of I'm a geek. I like working on my laptop. I like taking things to production. My character flaw is I have a hard time just doing like a demo. I like to take that demo and bring it to production. I have a hard time saying, well, it's not okay just on my laptop, I gotta get it somewhere. That's a character flaw, you'll see it later. But let's dive into what makes a 15-factor application. Is that working? One code base, one application. So an application, we have a big A application like the Connect Hub that Fiserv talked about, whereas there's dozens or hundreds of applications. And there's a little A application. I'm talking now about the little A application, that microservice application or that monolith application. One code base, one application. So if I'm going to start building something, I want to think about this. And you can do it other ways. The monorepo conversation always comes up right away at the beginning of the conversation. That's okay. This is just one way of doing things. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way. There's options. You have options. You have trade-offs. API first. The API becomes the contract. So I've been around for a while. There was this process where, hey, we're going to go ahead and build the back end, and then when we're done, then you start working on the front end. That waterfall approach. It makes me a little uncomfortable, like just thinking how much time we wasted and then that process of, oh, no, go back, we got to change something on the back end, and when we're done on the back end, then we'll fix it on the front end. It's just weird. So this API first thing, we have some options. And one of the things that the Spring team has done is they've introduced a project called Spring Cloud Contract. So we can define the API. We can say, hey, I'm going to give you a hello world endpoint. And when you call it endpoint, I'm going to give you some known value back. And then we can actually both start working. The front end team says, hey, yeah, there's going to be a hello world endpoint. I can work with that. They don't have to wait until it's done. The back end team can say, all we need to do is develop a hello world application, hello world endpoint. But we just agree on that contract. We're going to say it's HTTP, maybe agree on our status codes, and we'll go from there. Yes, question? Fantastic. So the question was, our front-end team doesn't want to deal with Spring Cloud Contract. And that's okay. They want open API. We can do that too. The whole thing is, I want you to agree on a contract. Right, so if you can make an API, the only difference is, when I'm working with the front-end, or the front-end team, when I'm building something, when I have Spring Cloud Contract, that stub that I get, I can actually use that stub. So I can actually have request responses with that stub as opposed to the Open API. Open API, a lot of times it'll give you the example, you can run against the back end, but you need to have that done first. Spring Cloud Contract just takes it one step to the left, I'll say, where I can build some example transactions without having any code done. I can say, hey, if I make a request to this endpoint, return this value and a status code of 200. It'll turn that into a stub. A small package that actually answers. When you call that endpoint, I'll return this body with this status code. So that's the difference, is we can now go, once we agree that that's the contract, that's the API, now both teams can go forward. The API, open API process leaves it over here on the right. So that's just, we have options. But Spring REST docs is another option for delivering that, hey, same open API concept. We want to expose it. Here's our API, here's our docs, here's the way that we go forward. But this is a really important part, but that's a good question. And I like questions. I'm much better at answering questions. So if you've got questions at any point, ask. We're all in the same place. We're here trying to learn. And I want to give you as much as possible. Dependency management. This part's kind of easy if you're using Spring. Why is that? Spring Boot release trains. So everything, yeah, I love seeing all the heads on. Those release trains mean that if I upgrade a Spring Boot version from 2.6 to 3.1.2, the release train takes care of all the dependencies that I'm using. The Spring team guarantees that all of those dependencies in that release train will be compatible. So this part gets taken care of. Make sense? And it's the same. You've got other types of dependency management in other languages. I really like the one that Spring Boot provides. I like that guarantee. Yeah. Design, build, release, and run. This one I think is pretty easy to understand. But one of the things that we're trying to encourage with the 15 factors is we want you to design small features. Design small features. And that doesn't mean that you deploy small features. Design small features, whether it's a microservice or a monolith. Design small features, small iterations. I like to talk about, well, I don't like to talk about it, but this is therapy for me as well. I worked in a place where we had a massive application, a true monolith, an EAR file. Do you guys remember EAR files? That had dozens of WAR files in it. Oh, yeah. Thank you guys for sharing this part with me because it was hard. It was hard because it took us a year to deploy one release. All the problems that go inside of that EAR file, and of course that one WAR file really wasn't taking care of the boundaries. It was just pulling out the library and calling that library of the other WAR file. So it completely ruined any kind of borders, and it caused a lot of complexity inside that application. It was hard. Design small features. We want to convert our code into some binary that we can deploy. When we release it, we want to release it so it's unique, auditable. These are things that I'm encouraging. These are part of that 15 factors. Make it so it's identifiable. When I give you a version number, we know exactly what that matches up to. And then run it locally. Your platform will provide the utilities. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to switch over. Hopefully. I have no idea. I'm going to switch to my other screen. Can I do this? No. Well, maybe I'll switch to the demo later. All right. Let's keep going. Configuration, credentials, and code. Treat them like volatile chemicals if you mix them. I want my code completely separate from my configuration. I want my configuration completely separate from my security. Keep them apart. Keep them separate. That's all we're saying here. If you get them combined, there's a problem. We want, typically, ideally, we want your application, that binary that we built in the previous step, we want that to get its configuration from its environment. That makes sense? So on my laptop's going to provide the application, provide that binary with its configuration, and it'll run one way on my laptop. When it goes to test, it'll run a different way, but it's getting its configs from test. I'm going to say something just to get a sense. I feel like I got some people in here. I worked at a place, we built the jar, all the properties were in it. When you threw it over the wall to the ops team, they opened up the jar, they pulled out the properties, and then they put their properties in. Yeah, that's not good. See, like, there's these patterns that we find across the board, and these 15 factors. It's just a reminder of how we could go forward. So far, so good. Am I going too fast, too slow? Actually, I don't even know what time I need to stop. 3:15? Good. Volatile chemicals. Wait, why can't I move? Logs. Logs should be treated, this is the main thing, logs should be treated as event streams. I like all the cameras. So how many people had not heard of the 12 factors before coming here? Right, perfect. Yep, 12 factors. It started with, where? Who knows? Who knows where the 12 factors came out of? It was a process, I can't even think of the name. It's owned by Salesforce now. What is it? I don't remember. It started with this group. It was kind of a way of them pitching their product. It was really cool. I could have my Git repository, and I could say, Hiroshu. Heroku, yeah, Heroku. That's where it came from. They kind of developed these factors, and it made a lot of sense. Heroku was really, really cool. I remember this idea of Heroku push or Heroku deploy, and you just gave it your Git URL. That's pretty cool. I'm still a big fan of that pattern. I don't really want to do anything. All I want to do to get my code to production is git commit. And then I want the rest of the platform, whatever that path to production is, that's where I want to stop. And I know there's a lot of different ways to do it, but that's, as my developer hat, that's how I want to do things. I want to do git commit, and I don't want to have to worry about it. I just want to know that it's going to get to production. Or maybe a git tag. I'll show that later too. Disposability. Now, this is another interesting part. The whole idea here is I should be able to tear something down. It should be easy to tear something down and stand it back up. Now, a lot of applications, when you stand them up, hey, maybe they take a little bit of time, and sometimes closing things down, depending on how your connections work and how you're handling the shutdown hooks, sometimes it's a little tricky. But we want to fix those things. Be able to start new instances, stop new instances, or stop instances, and scale horizontally. Horizontally instead of vertically. So instead, if I need more capacity, I just want to throw out another instance. Start another instance of that application, instead of saying, oh, I got to go and give it more memory. I heard a few weeks ago, somebody that I work with was talking about developer mentality. And hey, my application's having some problems. Give it more memory. Hey, my application's still having more, give it more memory. And as I was laughing, I was listening to him, I was like, well, that wasn't me. And then he said, again, if it still doesn't work, give it more memory, and now it works. And I was like, maybe I have done that. Maybe I have done that once in a while. And that's okay. Like, I get it. We're getting there. But if you can think about it this way, scaling horizontally instead of vertically, yeah, it's a good practice. It's something to try, at least, if you're not doing it already. The other thing here is we used to assume, wrongly, that our infrastructure was going to be stable, right? We used to assume that, hey, this is our box, and we gave it a name. Maybe we had boxes named after mountains. This is Rainier, this is Everest. Like, they were going to be around for a while. We're going to take care of them. And that worked for a while, and now it doesn't. Now we assume that somebody else is running the computer. It doesn't have a name. We're going to eat it for lunch. Like, we're going to burn it up. Or it's running in the cloud, and the region goes down, and we're going to lose some money, but we're going to recover. But now, instead of assuming things are going to be stable, we should assume that our infrastructure is going to be not stable. It's going to be fragile. It might fall over. So we got to do things like making sure our applications can stop and start. There's been a few conversations here at the conference where orgs are talking about multi-cloud. Right? Makes sense, VMware. But that story of, hey, I want to move applications from region or from cloud to other cloud. Some people are doing it in real time. We had an example a few years ago, right? Shut down a whole region, shut down a cloud, and their application's still running in another cloud. Fantastic. But that example, that's not really a big deal anymore. More and more companies are doing that, running applications across clouds, across regions, across geographies, trying to get closer to their customer. But you have to have this factor in there if you're going to do that. So backing services, all we're saying here is the platform should provide those backing services. My app should say, hey, I would like a Redis, please. And the platform will provide it. Much like our configuration. But we're going to have these backing services. Anything that we're going to connect to. It could be, a database, or it could be another service. Backing services provided by the platform. Environment parity. Josh brought it up. It works on my machine. It works on my laptop. There's 500 steps to get it from here to production. Yeah, we want to do better. I don't know how long that it works on my laptop. I don't know how long that phrase is going to work. But it worked in 2014. But this is one of those things that we're trying to do here. We want to be as close to production as possible. So at the beginning, I asked if you were running Kubernetes on your laptop. There wasn't a lot of hands. So this is one of those things. You can run Kubernetes on your laptop. Laptops are decently sized. This laptop that I'm running today is a 16 gig Mac 15 inch or something from 2020. So not overly powered. We saw how long it took to do the native compile. But I can still run Kubernetes. And I'll show you how I install Kubernetes in a sec. But that environment parity, if I'm doing Kubernetes things in production, wouldn't it be nice if I could do Kubernetes things? So I'm going to ask another question. If you're doing Kubernetes, you're taking Kubernetes, you're running Kubernetes in production, where's your closest Kubernetes cluster? Is there a shared cluster? Is there some remote cluster? How are you using Kubernetes if your application is running on Kubernetes in production? How are you doing your development? Anybody want to throw it back? I'm very curious. When I started this role, like when I went into Omaha, I was asking, and there were still a lot of people, hey, we're getting used to this remote work, but we're still VPN into our office that's hours away, and they're doing things like RDP. Is anybody doing that still? Anybody in this room? RDP? No? How are you connecting to remote clusters? Remote stuff. I'm going to pick on you. Citrix. So you're doing your development into Azure. Okay. Yes, great. What else? Google Cloud. So your cluster's on Google Cloud. So how do you get your code when you're doing local development?
We have dev clusters.
Everybody has a dev cluster that's running in the cloud. Oh, you have a shared dev cluster. Okay, cool. Just trying to get a sense of where things are. That's great. Fantastic. But yeah, environment parity. So shared dev cluster. Yeah, if you're deploying your inner loop, you're pushing stuff out to that shared dev cluster as you're doing it. So again, this is a professional curiosity. When you do a Maven clean build, is that what you do? How do you get your local changes without doing a commit? How do you get your local changes up to that shared dev cluster? Say it one more time.
So you have those kubectl commands, and also you provide some plugin, Kubernetes plugin.
So you're building a local image and deploying a local image. Perfect. Okay. Fantastic. Does that make sense to everybody? Is that kind of similar, or is there any other patterns that anybody else is using? All right. Kind. Oh, so you weren't here when I asked if we were on a library, or maybe you were the one that raised your hand. Kind. Awesome. Kind is Kubernetes in Docker. And it's a way to run Kubernetes in a Docker environment. Cool. Let's keep going. Administrative process. These are things like database migrations, like things that don't need to be running all the time. We're going to do one-off. Put those into a separate bucket. Have a separate way of managing those. Database migration is a good example. If we're deploying 5 instances of something and we want to do a database migration, if you put that into the application, we had things like the Hibernate, auto schema update, some of the other database migration tools. I can't think of the names. What was it? Liquibase. Right, Liquibase says, hey, do this to this column. But if you're deploying multiple instances, they're all going to try to do the migration. And that's been a problem. I'm not the only one, right? So let's separate those. Let's put those into a different bucket, manage those things separately. It could be anything, not just database migrations. Users, any cron jobs, flip the switch to do your daily log or summary or whatever it is. Yeah, put those into a separate bucket. Port binding, all we're saying here, it kind of assumes a container, but this container that was being introduced with these 15 factors didn't necessarily mean Docker container or other. It's just whatever that artifact is, make sure you avoid port binding or defining the ports. Let your platform do those things. Avoid micromanaging the port assignments. When I'm first doing microservices, deploying a bunch of stuff on my laptop, using Spring Boot, I give the gateway the 8080 port. I give the user service the 8081 port. I give the server or the security the 9000 port, and I got to manage all these ports. And that's great for the first 3. And then it gets a little difficult. And if you chose a different port than I chose, then we got to, come to some agreement. So let's try to avoid that. That's all we're saying. Make sense? You have a question? Okay. Applications can be backing services as well. Statelets process, share nothing pattern. One of the things I like to say is, in the cloud, there's no file system. In this path from data center, from laptop to production. I haven't seen it in a while, but it was very surprising how many ways we were abusing like NFS and doing all the things that we could do in the data center. And they're like, what do you mean Kubernetes doesn't have NFS? What do you mean I can't mount that NFS mount? Like there's things, extra things with Kubernetes storage, how we're doing that. There's tons of options. We can get into that later. But yeah, you have to think about things a little bit different. We don't want to share anything, right? It used to be, we'll put everything in this file on this NFS share, and all of the other instances will read and write from that. That couldn't cause any problems at all, ever. I'm going to tell another story. I worked at a place, there was an Excel spreadsheet that everybody was kind of tying their things to. And right before I was pulled in, the guy left. And the company had no idea that all of these Excel spreadsheets all over the company were tied to that one Excel spreadsheet that they deleted because he left. It was on his file share. Yeah, fun stuff. Stateless process, we'll avoid that, okay? Make sure we're not sharing anything. Concurrency. Scale out using the process model again. Horizontally, not vertically. If I need more scale, give me more instances, then we can manage size, scope, etc. Good? Now we're getting into some of the factors that weren't in the original. Telemetry. When I deploy anything, and this was a big thing that drew me to Spring Boot, and I've had this conversation multiple times this week. The big thing that drew me to Spring Boot was the actuator. The actuator that I automatically add to every Spring Boot project, that actuator which gives me metrics out of the box. There's automatically metrics out of the box for a lot of the Spring projects. And a lot of times it's most of what I need. You can of course add your own, but it gave me that ability also to see, is my application healthy or not? So when I take an application, I deploy it into production, whether that production is on my laptop, out on the edge, or it's out in space. I know that I can go get those metrics. I know I can get the information that I need. So I like to treat all of those applications that I send to production like I might lose contact. It might be, in orbit, but I need to get those metrics. I need you to talk to me. So there's another cool tool. So hear me now, listen to me later. Prometheus RSocket proxy. If I just send something out into space and I don't have a way to ping it, a way to get its IP address, a way to talk to it, if I send that out into space and I'm using this module, and in that module I say, hey, here's how you call home. Just like the satellites that we send out into the universe, here's how you call home. Here's the frequency I want. You give it that host name, and with RSocket, it'll call home, and then you can open a two-way connection in order to get your metrics. You can scrape the actuator endpoints, for example. So Prometheus RSocket proxy. I'm going to say it one more time, and then you repeat it after me. Prometheus RSocket proxy. Well done. That's great. You'll hear me now, listen to me later. You'll appreciate it. Yeah. The actuator, micrometer, all the cool things that micrometer has done. And then the last one is authentication and authorization. And this is weird for me, because why is this at the bottom? These 15 factors are supposed to be like, hey, this is what you think of first, and then this is what you think of last. And I'm always a little like, especially that I got one of the Spring security team in here. I'm like, I don't agree with this. I'm just talking about it. I don't agree with it. And yeah, this is really more about securing your endpoints and doing like the RBAC. Like, hey, my service account, which service account is going to get access to this? So we really weren't saying don't think about security, but this is more about as you deploy it, connecting those dots. And I like to add that maybe it's thinking about securing that supply chain. If you're kicking something out into space, how are you securing it as well? Make sure it happens before production. Cool. Spring security, Spring authorization server, easy add-ons to whatever you're taking to production to make it easier. But Kubernetes also provides some really cool service account, RBAC, those kind of things. I don't want to go into too many like Kubernetes products, so I'm going to try to simplify it, and now I'm going to jump into a demo. So let's see how I can flippity-flip. If you want to stand up and stretch, that works. I'm going to try to figure out how to switch, and I have no idea. So let's do this. Let's try to wing it. Can I slide this over? Yeah. Start.spring.io. I'm going to try to do this over my shoulder. So I'm going to build an application with Spring Web, Spring Boot Actuator, and Spring REST docs. Because I want to do API first. I want to expose that API. I could have put the cloud contract, then we'd have to do a little bit more. But this is it. I'm going to use Maven, Java 3.1.2. Yeah.
I always question why the current GA is in the middle. The ones to the left, should we read those as try if you dare, try if you really dare?
So that's a great question. It's like, why is GA in the middle? Why is GA in the middle? It's selected, but why is it in the middle? Are we trying to imply that I should try some of these? Yes. Yes. I am fascinated by the open source ecosystem, period. I'm even more fascinated by Spring. That's why I'm here. That's why I love this job. One of the things that I learned in a previous role was this concept of it's okay to live on the bleeding edge as long as you know how to heal. So these 15 factors kind of lead into that conversation. If I've got these unique, identifiable, auditable versions that I'm taking to production, they're small, I can roll them back, I can do these things. Why wouldn't I take a snapshot? Why wouldn't I use that snapshot? And if I find a bug, what should I do? Should I stop using the snapshot? No, the answer is no. If I find a bug, that's my opportunity to help the community, to say, hey, Spring Team, you missed something. And I worked with the team, and it changed the way that I operate. My default mode is, hey, I'm doing something cool. I'm very comfortable taking snapshots to production. Not knowing what version or where it's going to be or how it's going to change. I'm very okay. If my tests pass, why not? Now, I'm not running a bank or fetal heart rate monitors or anything like that, but if my tests pass, yeah, I'm comfortable. And there's value. A lot of times people are asking like, hey, how can I contribute to Spring? I want to be involved. I want to help. That's your answer. And if you're not comfortable with Snapshot, take a milestone. Take a milestone release. That's your answer. That's how you can help give back to the community, is by taking one of those for a spin. Yes, great question. I'm going to build this, generate. Everybody knows, hopefully. Let's change that. I'm looking over my shoulder, but we got this. Oop. Yeah, replace it. All right, now I got to go to. We're totally going to get this, even though I can't figure out the screens. We will absolutely get this. Where's my terminal? Let's do this. What? 3-finger swipe up? What? Can I switch to my other screen? How do I take this? I don't know how to do that.
Go to the other desktop?
Yeah, I want to go to the other. I want to.
3-finger left and right.
3-finger left and right? Hello. That's not working. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Screen mirroring, mirror. That was the right answer. That's what we should do. All right, now we're doing the demo. No, downloads? No. Demo. And that thing that we just downloaded. Hello? Here we go. We'll take a look. So it's easy. I said I was going to show you Kubernetes. We talked about kind. I'm going to show you how I install Kubernetes. Settings. This is how I install Kubernetes. I click that button. This is Docker Desktop. I was using Kind and Minikube for a lot of reasons. They're kind of more, easy when you're going across Windows, Mac, and Linux. They're kind of easier to transfer. But on my different machines, this is what I do. I've moved away from kind, I've moved away from Minikube, and this is kind of my default setting. Just to show you, it's there, it works. I actually have found it a little bit snappier for me in my use cases, so I'm just happy to share that part. This kind of implies that you understand Kubernetes. I'm not going to go deep in there. I use one of the things called Flux CD, to set up my cluster. So I'm going to just go peek on it real quick. I should have Cube. I got my Docker desktop instance. I'm going to throw this up. And I'm going to pray that my cluster is up and running. It looks like it is. Okay, so Flux is good. I added another thing called Knative serving. We've been talking about scaled zero. It's been a hot topic. So hopefully I'll get to that too. But I have that deployed. So that's all that I've got. I got Kubernetes. I had Flux that's going to manage my infrastructure. And then Knative serving is how I deploy locally. This is my default setting. This is the way I run on my laptop.
What is this versus UI?
Well, what is
Is that versus UI?
which?
Like this.
Oh, this is K9s. So this is just, what you're seeing there is kubectl git pods -a with some extra details in the UI. Good question. K9S. K9S. So let's go and do our thing. We have our application. We understand what the Palm is going to look like. If I was cool, that open rewrite plugin that I showed you before, I might have that ready somewhere. If I'm checking out somebody else's project, I might run that open rewrite recipe just to make sure I'm up on the latest and greatest. But otherwise, I'm building my apps and we're going. I'm going to go a little bit fast. I'm going to say, hey, /mvnw. I'm just going to build my image. Spring Boot, build image. That'll work and take some time. But what this is using under the covers is build packs. I want to talk about build packs. Part of these 15 factors, if you're doing OCI images, if you're doing Docker images, I want to make sure this is the *1 thing. Friends, don't let friends use Docker files. Okay? If you see a Docker file, I want you to bat it down. Just say no. It's okay, bat it down. There are build packs. Build packs are Docker files, but they're going to generate that OCI image and they're going to have a bunch of best practices built in, especially the Java build pack, especially the one we're using here from Paketo. So if you've ever done the manage, like how much memory am I going to put in here, which JVM, there's a bunch of extra stuff that you're having to do. And if there's a CVE in one of those things inside of your Docker file, then what? Whose responsibility is it? And what happens when you have those Docker files and we're doing more than one application in a production? Somebody made a Docker file, somebody else copied that Docker file, and somebody else copied that Docker file, and now you have no idea what's in production as far as CVEs in your Docker file. We're at that point where that's not really good posture. I don't want anybody in this room to be on the front page for the wrong reasons. So I'll say again, build packs, because friends don't let friends use Docker files. Thank you, good, you passed. So this Docker file is done, it's ready, I have my demo, and it's up. I could push it. One of the things that we talked about, I can take that, I don't know the command off the top of my head. I'm going to take this image, I'm going to talk, I'm going to send that image to production. Some of the things that Spring Boot allows on Kubernetes is it allows me to get my configs from Kubernetes. Kubernetes has this construct of a config map. I can say, hey, in this namespace, here's a config map with this name. The Spring Boot with Spring Cloud Kubernetes, which I should go add that. The Spring Cloud Kubernetes client. And now you should be asking me, how come that client isn't in start.spring.io? Right, that's what you're all thinking? Yes, only because it's difficult to get in there. I was expecting a much worse answer, but I asked Ryan Baxter just before I got in here. This is how you want to go get that client for now on spring.io in Spring Cloud. Actually, I'll show you again. Spring.io. If you haven't been here, it's pretty awesome. They've made a bunch of updates to the documentation. Now it's searchable. You can do a lot of cool things. Spring Cloud Kubernetes is the project I want you to look at. And then you can go into here to learn, get the reference doc, and then go to the starters. And we're going to just grab this one. Why? Why? With that starter, there's some of these concepts. Discoverability is a cloud native concept. The idea that I want to talk to another service, but I don't know where it's at. So with discoverability, you have some system, something that says, here's where that other service is. So I want to ask for service B. I'm service A, I want to ask for service B. Before Kubernetes, we had Eureka from a company maybe you heard of Netflix. Netflix. They gave us this project called Eureka, which is now managed by the Spring team. But that was a way of, hey, I'm service B. Here's my address. If anybody's looking for me, call. Spring provided that load balancing Eureka client that I could say, hey, give me all of them and I'll do my work, or just give me the next one in a round robin strategy. Now with Kubernetes, Kubernetes has its own DNS, its own name service. So when I deploy a service, service A or service B, it gets a DNS name. It gets a DNS entry inside of that cluster. And this is the project, this Kubernetes client, that allows you to consume those just like you're consuming with Eureka. And that's important, not for me because I'm using Kubernetes locally, but for anybody that's not using Kubernetes locally. Anybody that's doing that development, they might have Eureka locally, and they're gonna use the Kubernetes naming discovery in Kubernetes. And this project allows you to kind of switch between both, which is important. So instead of just hard coding service.cluster.local, you can say, hey, I want service A, and you'll get it. But also the configs. We're familiar with the config server, Spring Boot, Spring Cloud config server, and that paradigm, we can translate that right into the config maps. Or we can still deploy a config server, and there are a lot of people that are still deploying Eureka and config server because they're still migrating from platform A to Kubernetes, from some other place to Kubernetes, and they would like to keep those things in place, and you can do that. You can still deploy your config server and your discovery server to Kubernetes. Make sense? Looks like you have a question. Okay, what are you thinking? Does this all make sense? All right, let's see if I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna try to copy a command. I don't know, here, actually I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna back up. I talked about versioning, uniqueness. I have this initializer plus. It's just a Spring Shell app that I use to do some interesting things. I use it to tag things and use these other extensions. So I see we're getting close to time. But this is the way that I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna run this initializer plus, and I'm gonna say help. This is a Spring Shell. How many people have done Spring Shell? When I don't remember the things I'm trying to do, I have this Spring Shell command that does all the automation for me. So I used to tell people to fork the initializer, put your own stuff on the menu in the initializer, and now I don't. I use the initializer, because keeping up with the fork is hard, and I write shell scripts to manage those. Because I've got Spring Boot 3, and I've got Java 17, I've got native images, this CLI allows me to do things consistently. So what I'm doing here, I don't remember the thing, is I like to do my extensions. So my extensions are doing, I just added a Maven extension here. These are the things I like to add to all my projects. That's why it's in the shell. It adds the JGitVer Maven plugin. That JGitVer Maven plugin says the release for this image is going to be based on the tag name in Git. The release of this image is going to be based on the tag name. So it can be a commit ID tag, or it can be an actual tag name. So as I do this, I'm going to do this again. I think there's another one I want to do. Normally I do the project name, but I'm going to quit here. So Spring Shell, take a look at it, but I'm going to do one more build. Spring Boot build image. Try that again. And this time the version is going to be different, I think, at the top. Because I don't have a Git repo, that was another step, but it's building, it changes the version name automatically based on the revision. So instead of having to manage the Maven version of that project, my Maven version is 0, and I use this extension to give it a version based on the Git. And I can do that consistently across all my projects. Yes?
I noticed you used Maven. What is your thoughts on Gradle?
So this is a great question. I noticed you're using Maven, and I'll tell you, what I just showed you, the Spring Shell, is why I'm still using Maven. Maven has a schema. So that schema tells me, here's where my dependencies are, here's where my plugins are. I know exactly where everything is. I was working with Steve Riesberg from the Spring Security yesterday, and yeah, there's different sections, and when you go from one app to another, those Gradle files look a little bit different. So today, I'm sticking with Maven because of that. Now, your next question is, well, what about all the performance improvements from Gradle and all of its caching? Well, there's another project that I'm going to show you called Maven D. I'm going to do this Maven D clean package. And I'm glad you guys are asking questions because I forgot the command that I need to run to deploy my thing to Kubernetes. So Maven D, much like Gradle, stands up a daemon and does some of that caching. Still not as awesome as Gradle for all the other things that Gradle provides, but one step closer. So that's another thing to check out. I want to see if I can do one quick. I'm not going to use that. I'm going to stop. I'm going to ask for questions. What I wanted to do, I wanted to remind, actually we can do this, MBNW. I'm going to run it locally. I'm not going to deploy it to Kubernetes. Definitely use Knative serving. That's what I do. I didn't have the command ready to run, but I'm running locally. These Spring Boot apps provide the metrics, do the telemetry. If you need the security, we add Spring Security, maybe authenticating against an authorization server. What other questions do you have? Questions? Yes?
I was kind of interested, you were showing the Kubernetes client.
Yes?
You mentioned that you might be able to swap between Reaper and Kubernetes
Yep.
as to where you're getting discovery. Because depending on where we deploy, it may or may not be on the Kube cluster. So at least at the time of Spring Boot 2, you kind of have to do like active Reaper client and stuff like that.
Yep.
So how do you do that so that you can swap with the Kubernetes discovery?
So if you're deploying your JVM-based image, you can define it as a property. You can use the profile that you're deploying to. Hey, I'm in Kubernetes or not. So you can use those features to determine whether or not you want to enable those dependencies. So that's one option. But we can definitely dig into more if you want to have a step forward. But good question. Yeah, but we can just use that one client. And there are slight differences between the normal config client and the Kubernetes config client. There's a couple of options that give you that ability to switch. There's Fabricate and Kubernetes. I default to the Fabricate or to the Kubernetes one, but that all client grabs everything. Good question. Any other questions? Yes? Say it again. In a multi-tenant environment. Great question. If I'm deploying into a multi-tenant environment, how do I manage the configurations? So let me just scoot over here. One of the things that I showed Knative, and typically I'm deploying additional namespaces. So there's a concept. Actually, I'm going to scoot over real quick, and I'm going to show you guys another project to help. Yeah, feel free to go. Thank you so much for your time. This is good, but I'm going to answer a couple of questions because I'm not getting kicked out yet. So when I'm standing up a cluster, I messed up on the flight here. I said, I'm just going to restart my home box, what I'd normally do the deployment. I'll just restart it. It'll be fine. But Tailscale didn't come back up, and I have no idea how to start it. So at home, I got the setup, but I'm going to show you exactly what happens. I'm actually going to stop this one. Maybe, or maybe not. Come on. So yeah, maybe I won't be able to show you because I got the ball. But here's what we can do. If you've got more questions, I want to show you the cool stuff. I want to help you get your Spring Boot apps into production on Kubernetes. I want to show you all the tips and tricks that I have. But I'm out of time. I'm over time. So let's pick up this conversation at the Spring booth in the Connect Hub. With that, I'm DaShaun.